Alright guys, looking at the money market model. This time we're going to be looking at changes in the money supply. So we have increase and decrease. Again, we're going to start both of them in just a basic standard equilibrium. So we've already gone through changes in money demand. Again, the main things from that would be a change in APL or a change in real GDP, each of which would cause a proportional positive increase in the same direction. So they have a positive relationship. So APL goes up, so does MD. Now, money supply, this one is the easy one. Money supply curve is controlled solely by the Federal Reserve in the United States, or we could say a nation's central bank, which the Fed is basically our central bank. So they control the money supply curve. Nothing that we as citizens can do can change that curve. So it is up to the Fed what happens to this curve. So basically they can either be instituting expansionary or contractionary monetary policy. When they're instituting expansionary monetary policy, they're doing so because they're trying to boost the economy. So it likely means that we are in a recessionary gap, though not necessarily. So the point is though, when they do engage in expansionary monetary policy, there are three steps that they can take. So we have our three things: reserve requirement, discount rate, open market purchases or sales. So expansionary, they want to grow the economy, they want to increase the money supply. So first of all, let's draw it, and then we'll go through what causes it. So it will be where the money supply curve shifts to the right. So increase is still to the right, decrease still to the left. Just because it's vertical, that doesn't change anything. I know I didn't quite touch the axis on each of those, I should have. So we have M1, M2. So we see that it's moved to the right. And then what's so important about this is what is its effect on the interest rate. And so we have our new point of equilibrium, E2. And we have, as a result, a new interest rate. And we notice that that new interest rate is lower than the original. So E2, the interest rate has gone down. So what this means is that expansionary monetary policy leads to a lower interest rate. Okay, so increasing the money supply causes the interest rate to fall. Pretty simple. There's not a whole lot to it. This is a really important thing though, and this is probably going to be the start of a lot of questions that you encounter in this course. Will be the Fed or a central bank engaging in an expansionary monetary policy. So what could they do to cause this to happen? Well, with the reserve requirement, they could decrease the reserve requirement. That would allow banks then to lend out more money, which would increase the money supply, causing the interest rate to fall. They could also decrease the discount rate, making it cheaper for banks to borrow from the Fed, in turn increase the amount of money banks have to lend out, which would in turn increase the money supply, cause interest rates to fall. And the most important one, I know it's last, but this is the most significant one. This is the one that they most commonly do. They don't actively change those all the time. But this last one, open market purchase. So it is a purchase of government bonds, of treasuries, of securities. Those are all the same thing. So I'm using terms that can be used basically interchangeably. So an open market purchase of government treasuries, of government bonds, it's the way the US government borrows money, essentially. And the Fed will buy those. So it happens, to explain this kind of briefly, of how exactly that increases the money supply. So picture it this way. The Fed buys $1 million in treasury bonds. So that is an open market purchase. So they buy $1 million. What happens, the Fed actually creates this money out of thin air. That $1 million never existed before. And somebody at the Fed who's working on this, the open market committee, they will type $1 million and they will create that money. They will buy the bonds. So they will hit enter, send, and $1 million will go to the account of whoever the seller of the bond is. The seller will then give the bonds to the Fed. So the Fed gets bonds. The seller gets $1 million. That money is deposited into a bank, and then that increases the amount of money that banks have to lend out, increasing the money supply, causing the interest rates to fall. We're going to start with that one. We'll start with open market sales for the decrease, since I'm talking about that. So again, this is the most important. Now we're talking about a decrease in the money supply, so it's going to shift left. So it looks like this, M1 and M2. Make sure we have everything labeled, 1 and 2. And then our interest rate is going to go up. Now with the open market sale, it works the opposite. This is where the Fed has, so they have $1 million in treasury bonds. and they choose to sell them on the open market. All that means, by the way, open market, it means that anybody is allowed to participate. So it is open to anybody, so to people, citizens, banks, companies around the world. That's all it means. So the Fed is selling $1 million worth of bonds. So when they sell that, the buyer of the bonds, they get the bonds. The Fed takes their bonds, gives it to the whoever's purchasing them, and then the Fed in return gets that money. So they get the $1 million. But here's what the Fed does. When they take that $1 million back, that money is now no longer in circulation. It is not part of the money supply any longer. So an open market sale decreases the money supply because that money is no longer available to banks or to private citizens. So it is out of the money supply. It is as if it ceases to exist. So again, to recap that, because this is the important part. Open market purchase, the Fed gets bonds. In exchange, they give somebody else money. They are creating new money. That increases the money supply. Open market sale, the Fed sells the bonds, gives somebody else the bonds. They get, money back. That money now is no longer in the economy, so it decreases the money supply. So that's an open market sale. The other two things they can do, they could raise the reserve requirement, so they could increase the amount of money that banks have to keep and are not allowed to lend out, which would therefore limit the money supply, decrease it. And they could also raise the discount rate, which is the rate that banks pay when they borrow from the Fed. Again, making it harder for banks to borrow money. Less money that banks have decreases the money supply, raises interest rates. So I went through that kind of quickly, so if you need to rewatch this, it is definitely a foundational, important, fundamental video. So I hope this helps you guys. So we have expansionary and we have contractionary monetary policy in a nutshell. All right, see you guys. Till next time, this has been a La Money production.